Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's noon Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern on a Monday. So it's time for Content Chat, and I'm your host, Erika Heald. Today, I have Dane Frederiksen with me, and we're going to be talking about all sorts of things related to starting with the end in mind. So creating B2B content while planning for reuse. And because of his background, we're going to be leaning a little heavily on the video aspect of things. So Dane, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you mind taking a minute to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Erica. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. This is always fun to do these kinds of things and share what I've learned. And, I'm here to kind of spread the gospel about video and help people where I can. So, this is an interesting time for me in my career and in video right now. As you probably know, everything's changing and has changed. And so I'm really focused on that new stuff about, basically how can we help marketers, do more with video as a tool to get their message out there in front of their audience. So that's what I'm all about right now.
Fantastic. Well, let's just start there. So in the work that you've been doing with marketing teams, what are the biggest challenges you're seeing when it comes to creating content consistently and specifically creating video content?
Yeah, I think just from a high level, it's pretty clear from the data. You don't have to look very far. Even Content Marketing Institute has studies to show that marketers generally just struggling to create high value content consistently. And I mean, that's really the basis of what I wanted to talk about is, video is a highly desirable form of content, but a lot of times, the kind of old way of thinking about video is that when you hear the word video, you think expensive and difficult. And really, that's not the case anymore. It doesn't have to be. And so that's kind of my general starting point on that.
Totally.
Yeah, I guess we can.
No, I mean, I definitely, back in the day, I would say, whenever we would be doing any kind of a video, it was always like it had to have, we would hire a video crew, we would sometimes use a professional studio, like, and at one of my employers, we actually had a professional studio on site where we did all sorts of stuff like that. So it used to be all of those things, but definitely it feels like in the post, COVID world where everybody had to get, video enabled at home and get a setup that was reasonably good for recording. It just, it seems like it's really made it a lot easier for content teams.
Yeah. I mean, all those things are still true. There's still studio shoots and high-end production, and that definitely has a place, and that's important in a lot of cases. But I think, as you pointed out, there's been this like shift that's I think it kind of snuck in under a lot of marketers' noses. They haven't quite realized that all this remote video that we're doing for conferences, well, this is actually a great way to harvest content frequently, at scale, and low cost. And I would add that the sort of bar for what's professional quality has come down, right? This kind of remote video thing that we're doing right now, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, maybe not professional enough. You're going to probably want to do a studio shoot. But now look around, look on LinkedIn, look what other people are doing. I've done some poking around, and it seems for the most part, this is professional quality. Now, there's going to be a place for the high quality in other places, but there's always a place for the sort of lower or even mid-tier content. And I would even argue you could even go lower than this. I mean, if you had something amazing happening, like Bill Gates is at the airport, you could have shaky iPhone footage and do a quick interview with him. And that's probably high value content because of who it is. It's not about the production value. So I guess the point there is that there's opportunities and there's a place for all different kinds of content. And totally. Yeah. And then the other thing that's sort of happened is social media, right? Like we all think of social media now about like influencers and TikToks, and, they're doing like an influencer video about like a shoe or something like that, or maybe like a soft drink. But there's this opportunity for B2B marketers. We can use those same things, those same platforms, and we can even use things like influencers or maybe remote video, but we can take advantage of this shift that's happened, but for B2B, it hasn't really been capitalized yet.
I think a big part of it is because, marketers aren't sure what kind of video content people want, specifically in B2B. So we lean in heavily on doing things like having a webinar, and sure, we'll make the webinar available for a replay, but we don't necessarily do a lot of reuse. And certainly people don't even necessarily plan for reuse. I know, because when I put together scripts and documentation for all this kind of stuff, and I put in notes for, hey, are you going to turn this into an infographic, or are we going to do, pull out things from it? It seems like frequently people haven't necessarily thought about all those different ways to repurpose that video content.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple good things to get into there. Is, you started off with like what to do in the first place, right? And what are your audience, what do they care about? Well, just to point out, you kind of already have the sense of that in most cases. Whatever you're blogging about or LinkedIn posting about or tweeting or whatever else you're doing with text, all that stuff can also be video. There are ways. It doesn't have to be on camera. You could do animated text, with backgrounds. You could do things like AI voices if you don't have someone to speak or they don't want to. So there's tools to take whatever else you're doing for content and make it video. And then to your point about repurposing, yeah, repurposing as an afterthought is nice. It's probably a great idea. And, maybe we don't get to decide when the good ideas happen, right? maybe the good idea happens after you've already done it, and that's fine. But a better way to go, I would argue, would be to start with, pre-purposing or repurposing in mind from the beginning. And I think with video in particular, there's something that non-video natives, people that haven't spent 30 years in video production, might not be thinking about, is that the format of video already contains all the other formats within it, right? You've got images, you've got sound, everything that's being spoken can be transcribed into text. So there's kind of like a basis there already for just pulling out the pieces that you want. And you could, take quotes in text and repurpose those for articles. So when you start thinking about this, you're like, okay, well, if we're going to be repurposing into different formats, let's come up with a plan and a system to do that. And I think if you do start with the end in mind of the different platforms that you want to be on, the different types of content people care about, you can start to backfill and start to make a plan that's going to get you that in the production process.
It really comes down to having that well-defined content governance process, because if you have, both the planning documents, your, script templates for creating video content, for example, but you also have built into, your structured template for working on that project, that you also have your distribution channels, well, then it becomes evident some of the things that you're going to want to be thinking about. So instead of just, recording something straight through and not thinking about having those natural breaks in the conversation, the taking a breath before responding to the other person, and doing those other things that really allow you to take clips, for example, you don't think about it until it's too late. And then you're like, oh, if only we'd thought about it, that, thing that so-and-so said right there, that would have made a really great soundbite for social. But when you actually have that planning doc that you're sharing, and you've already noted that, hey, when we do a content chat, we always do a recap, and frequently recap has some call outs, and we've also repurposed them into, infographics or slides. Like when you have all that kind of stuff as part of your planning document, then you already have that in mind, and then you can structure the flow appropriately, just as an example.
Yeah, I mean, that's great to have it mapped out. And I think that is the goal that we're all sort of working towards, I would imagine. But like, just to kind of point out that we are at a place now, again, with remote production and the cheap, widely available editing tools like Descript, where you don't necessarily have to have it all planned out to start to plan it out. And the way that that can happen is with testing, right? Test early and often. So much of this video conversation is overwhelming to people, right? They don't know what they want to do. What should we say? How do we say it? What's the process? Well, I think as you work towards a governance document or documentation, you can start to work backwards. It's like, okay, well, what do we want to do in the first place? Let's just test something before we document it all out. And then that will start to get you those learning lessons that you can build, the learnings as they go and start to develop your formats and processes. So I don't know, food for thought that, don't let this be like, we got to get the plan perfect before we start making progress.
That said, though, you do need to have a content strategy before you just start creating content because, as you know, I am on a personal mission to stamp out those random acts of content because I've been on the receiving end of those, last minute requests for things that you just hear the idea, you're like, oh, this is a dumb idea. This is going to suck up all my time, and it absolutely doesn't have any sort of business objective that it supports. Hate that, hate that, hate that. So I'd love to hear your feedback on what kind of a minimum viable content strategy looks like
Yeah,
before you dive into creating video.
it's a great topic. And, again, this is why we're chatting about it, right? Is to explore this stuff. I don't know that I necessarily have the right answer. I think it's like it depends kind of thing, right? Because I'm an entrepreneur with my own business. I can quite easily test something that I see the value in without repercussions of making people on my team spend their hard-earned money and time doing, right? But to your point, yeah, if you have an organization with other people, that might not be the best way to go. You do need some sort of strategy, right? But maybe the strategy could be the minimum viable strategy of like, hey, let's set aside an hour and test something. That's my strategy. I don't know. It's a thought. I'm not sure what the right answer is because I think it's going to vary person by person, company by company.
Well, I think with any kind of content creation, you have to at least have a goal of something you're trying to achieve as a business, and something that you want the person who views or reads or shares your content to do. So you want them to feel something, think something, or take a specific action. I know there are a lot of folks who are like, you don't need a call to action for everything. It's like, sure, but you need to have a point of view, a perspective, and a reason for creating a piece of content. And if it's useful to another human being, you've at least made them laugh. You've made them reconsider something. If there's no reaction in no action, I don't know that you should have created that content in the first place, because it's the old, if the tree falls in the wood and nobody sees it or hears it. And I think that's true for content too.
It certainly can be, and it sounds like the right way to go. I'm just trying to dovetail that with what I've done myself. Is I think I've been testing things that it was just for me, right? If no one ever saw it or never took any action, that would be okay, because I'm just, can I do this? I just started this process of launching my own video podcast. So I wanted to test this sort of system that I'm advocating for others, repurposing and setting up a pipeline. I wanted to test it on myself. If people watch this podcast, that's great. If it works, that's great. But just let me go through the process of making the process and spitting out the deliverables. So I've got, 10 episodes now recorded, which you may remember you were on one of those. So you were part of my evil plan to test this. And I'm glad I did, because I learned a lot. And I think I could make the argument that if it never went out at all, it was still worthwhile. But since I did go through the effort, I am very interested in making it work for me the best that I can. So,
Right.
yeah.
And as the entrepreneur, you're able to make that decision. I think with content teams, the big issue is you've got to get the stakeholder buy-in for spending the time and prioritizing doing these things. So, that also can be really challenging. Do you have any tips, or have you seen from some of your clients what's worked for getting that buy-in for doing video? Because there are folks who love watching video, but who don't want to be making that video.
Yeah. Let me think about that for a second. It's, different cases for sure. What I've been doing that has really helped has sort of been doing this test early and often strategy, because this is so easy. It's kind of awesome for me to be able to hop on a call with someone, record the conversation, just pretend like we're doing a podcast, take that, send it back to them, and then show them, hey, this is how easy it is. Yeah, there's more we could do. And yeah, if you want to do that, let's definitely evolve the plan, test the plan, make sure we're headed in the right direction. But these tools are so easy now that you can start to give these sort of free samples to get buy-in. I mean, that's what they do at the store, right? You want to try the little bite, you like it? Well, let's take the next step. So I think that's one thing. Obviously, tying it to business goals and return on investment is what I'm working on right now. I haven't ever been in the place where I'm the one publishing content and measuring content performance. I've always been the person that makes the pretty video. Then I hand it off to the client, and they go do what they're going to do. But this is what, again, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid for myself. So I'm learning how to do this sort of thing now, and, you know, making some headway in figuring out how that's going to go. I'm looking at right now Google Analytics, Tag Manager, and UTM links as a way to track the buyer journey. And I just said those things, but I don't fully understand them. But that is my understanding of that. That's my strategy, is to head in that direction. Is like, to what extent can I track the buyer journey and then tie that back to ROI? I think there's another part of this conversation. You could kind of flip it on its head and say, well, what else are you doing? And what are you spending on other kind of content? And do we just generally feel like that's going to perform better than video, which is a more engaging format, more shareable format? It's where people are. What is it? 10% of the video audience is now on YouTube or something like that. I don't have all the stats. You can chat GPT that, but just look around at like where people are spending their time. They're in video land. And if you're not there, and you're sort of leaving the door open to your competitors doing that. And I think we have this special opportunity now in time where these tools are now available: remote video, AI editing. And for B2B, marketers are not taking advantage of that fully in general, because they're saying that they're struggling. And I think if they implement a plan like this, they're going to find that it's not such a struggle. And then they're going to be out there in, you know, start to measure those results for themselves and whatever KPIs they want.
Mm-hmm. So based on your testing and learning and, you know, putting your many years of video, you know, production, video storytelling to work, you know, how have you seen that AI can really help content marketers, you know, scale content creation in meaningful ways and help folks get more out of the content they're creating?
Yeah, certainly not the expert on AI, and I don't know that anyone could be, because it's changing so fast, right? Like, maybe the AI is the expert on AI, but there's a couple ways. Number one for me is the video editing tools, Descript. It's made it so easy now to edit it in a text-based format and share that with a team, and have non-editors, non-video editors be able to pull out the selects that they want and make that collaboration a lot easier. And then it makes repurposing very easy as well. So that's one big way. Another way, which you're probably all familiar with, is just using things like ChatGPT to condense, proofread, punctuation, you know, just sort of like a advanced spell check kind of functions. I think that's been incredibly helpful. Definitely some Gen AI for like a blog post, making like a cool image that is, you know, royalty free, hopefully. I'm not even sure about the legal consequences these days anymore. Like what you're supposed to be doing.
Royalty free, but you can't copyright it, so anybody could use it.
Yeah, so that's a whole Wild West right there, right? But I think that's incredibly helpful for someone like me, just to like get something out there with a blog post, or, you know, some images. And I know there's things that are way beyond my skill level right now that people are doing with actually motion video and AI. I've started to, well, maybe not started, but I've been kind of leaning in the other direction. My sense is that maybe is not playing to my strengths as a more human touch kind of person. And I think I have a practice skill of being able to do like video interviews and things like that. And people tell me that I make them comfortable. And so I'm leaning in the other direction. I'm leaning more on the human side of this, and real people, real interviews, things like that. And then, you know, let's have a place for the AI and definitely use that. But when it comes to the really high end AI video creation, there's people that are way far ahead of me on that. And I'm sort of like, I've already conceded that that's not the race I'm going to run. So
totally,
we'll see. You know, jury's out. But
do you feel like there's value in using AI to create those transcripts of your videos and then to actually like publish them and to publish show notes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there certainly could be. I'm not quite sure of the implications for like the algorithm and how it's going to like look at whether it's written by AI, and does that rank it less? Does it somehow get flagged or cheapened? I'm just not clear on that yet, but just from my own use, I would find that incredibly helpful to be able to condense and do summaries and things like that for sure. I think that answers your question.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's a place for it, but I'm just always like kind of looking over my shoulders like, are we sure this is the right way to go? Because I know some people are like leaning very heavily on AI writing like blog posts and articles and things like that. And I've just heard
not the best use case for sure.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of noise that that's not the right way to go. So
do you have any Do you have any examples that you can share, including anonymous examples of some of the kind of challenges or or less effective ways that you've seen folks kind of, finally come to find the truth in the um, repurposing? Because, I've certainly seen people thinking they're doing a great job of repurposing, but their idea of repurposing is posting the exact same content on the exact same channel all the time. So I always flag that as, that's a worst case scenario of repurposing, because every channel is different. So I'd love to hear maybe some good examples and some terrible don't do this at home examples too for folks to learn.
Yeah. Well, an idea comes to mind of like comparing it maybe to cooking, right? Is like if you have taken all these ingredients and intertwined them and cooked them together in such a way that they are not easily extractable, that's probably a bad way to go. And I think there's probably all kinds of use cases of that. Nothing really coming to mind, but I'm just trying to go high level. And like with a food recipe where you have the ingredients are separated on the plate, like maybe chicken here and vegetables over there. Well, that would be a lot easier to repurpose that chicken because it's not already mixed with the other things. So this is sort of like an editing metaphor, I guess, and I guess it's also a production metaphor, because if you go about producing content, you had a use in mind, right? And so by definition, if you repurpose it, it was not designed for that use.
Mhm.
A surfboard doesn't make a very good skateboard because that's not what it's for, right? So I think that there's some wisdom to that sort of thing. But I would say there are cases where, just for example, if you had a video interview and you have some B-roll, hoping everyone knows what that is, that you're cutting away to in the edit that's showing the thing that you're talking about, I think that B-roll could be very easily repurposed into shorts. Maybe on a shot-by-shot basis. Let's say you've got someone use the surfboard example. Someone taking the surfboard and carrying it out of the water and putting it onto their car. Well, that's a good piece of B-roll you could use for like an ad or like a little promo about that surfboard rack, right? That makes sense. You don't need to use that whole interview that you also had with that. That said, if you had the interview on its own and no B-roll, you could use that maybe for like a 1 minute or 30-second short on YouTube. So that's a good use where it would make sense to maybe repurpose that. Without getting into too many technical details, one thing to just sort of be aware of as someone who's worked a lot of existing projects, when you have an editor who's done a complicated edit and you hand that off to someone else, there's all kinds of potential implications that come with, like, do you have rights to use that footage? Where is that footage? What kind of editing tools did they use? Did they use some plugins that are only going to work with the person that has those, and you hand those off, those don't work anymore? So you can kind of start out with this beautiful vision of repurposing after the fact, but it could be almost harder than starting from scratch in some cases. And so, I don't know, just a word to the wise that just because you could theoretically repurpose, it may not be the best use of your time and money.
Yeah, I think what happens frequently is people don't necessarily get all of the rights releases. So, like, they won't get all of the people who appear somewhere. They won't get the permissions from them in writing to use their likeness. If you're at an event, if you're the one hosting the event, hopefully you've included a disclaimer up front that says that by entering this, event, you've agreed to the use of your likeness in anything, that, like, for, the producer or any of the sponsors are doing. Like, if you haven't had that kind of stuff up front, or you haven't had somebody sign a physical release, then you can usually, you're limited to whatever that first agreed upon use is, depending upon what it was, because there are all sorts of rules around, what is acceptable for advertising, versus sales, marketing, educational use. So I think that's one of the things that people really find tricky, is navigating all of the kinds of rights, including, if they're filming in a public or private location that they don't own. So, are there any kind of considerations that you've run into from, maybe even your work as a videographer that people don't think about in advance, where if you're planning to reuse things that you do need to kind of think through?
Yeah, well, there's using once and reusing. I guess we could kind of talk to both of those. It's such a weird time right now because we've got like the old way of doing it, which is still there and still exists, but then we have all these new things that have crept in that I think there's like different like aspects about it that aren't clear. Like you pointed to about like getting usage rights, or let's say you go to a convention. There's different rules about like, there's unions that run these convention centers, and you're not supposed to like put tripods down without permission. But like, does that mean you're allowed to use your iPhone to shoot something? Does that make you a videographer? Like, are you just someone shooting their video? I think there's probably a lot of mistakes are happening that people aren't realizing they're making, just because it's so easy now to just start doing stuff and probably posting it out there and feeling the repercussions without even realizing or thinking about whether you should or could or should be doing something in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you point out, that probably comes into play with repurposing as well, as like you might have gotten rights to use it one way, but not another way. So I'm sure there's been plenty of people getting burned on social media using music that they're not supposed to, that somebody else had rights to. So
Yeah. Using images that they only purchased one time use in one specific setting, all that kind of good stuff. The other thing I'm running into a lot now is people who don't, like B2B folks in particular, who don't normally work in, situations where children are involved. They'll be at if you're shooting video or images at events, you can't just include children that are, identifiable children. And I thought that was an interesting thing that came up with a client recently. They had no idea. I'm like, do you have permission from the parents to show those children? Because if you don't, you absolutely can't use them in any kind of, in any kind of public setting. You're opening yourself up to a potential lawsuit from a parent who doesn't, who sees that on Facebook and says, I never, I don't ever show my kids on Facebook. You were somewhere and you saw my kid and took the picture. Well, you didn't ask me.
Yeah. This is sort of another case that sort of proves this theory I've had for a long time, that there's no such thing as common knowledge. Some people don't know some stuff that's pretty obvious to the rest of us. And so, we have this ability to shoot and post on social media within a minute or less now. So I think the big word of caution would be, I call it slow your roll. Right?
Yeah, just because you can't
take a minute.
Good.
Yeah, make sure that you know that this is okay. And I don't know how you would ever validate, of all the things you could do, like how you would ever validate that you've covered all your bases.
Yeah.
Universe is a complicated place. You can't pretend to know all the things. I've gotten in trouble shooting in places that I wasn't supposed to be shooting, but I didn't know. It wasn't obvious. Like how many people are shooting in airports and getting in trouble with the TSA because
you're
it just
not allowed to
didn't occur to them that they can't shoot. Hey, we're going on vacation. We're going through security. Like,
yeah, that's a violation. That could get you. That could get you to miss your plane.
Yeah.
Similarly, I think
I don't
grocery
know how you
stores.
protect from everything.
Yeah, grocery stores are another one of those locations that people don't think about. That you're not allowed to take photos in either. People obviously do, and things.
Doctors' offices. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of those kinds of situations where you do need to look into it first. And luckily now you don't have to call your lawyer. You can just chat GPT it, as Drew Davis would say. And, while you won't be getting legal advice from chat GPT, you will get at least an inkling of whether or not you need to go get some legal advice before doing that thing you had a great idea for.
Right.
But just as a rule of thumb, any kind of, famous public place, you absolutely have to get written permission, and you probably will have to pay them money in order to shoot anything there. Even if you're a tiny little nonprofit, even if you're creating a student film, it doesn't matter what the thing is. You can't just go and shoot on someone else's property without permission. But once you get that permission, it's the making sure that you have that little creative reuse clause. And whenever, I would be doing a piece of content for someone, I would always, make sure that I understood what rights they were looking for. And if they wanted to have the right to reuse my content, to create derivative content, I would usually, first of all, I'd build in that to the fee that I was going to charge, but I'd also then build in that they had to give me the right to edit it. So that way things wouldn't be taken out of context and attributed to me in a way that could cause me any issues with the kind of work that I do. So it's, it is just smart to always think those things through. And even if you don't end up doing all the things, if you have the ability to do so with that content that you've created, or that you've created with someone else, then it opens up so many more possibilities. And it's easier to get the yes before than it is to get it after.
Yeah, so I hope people are getting that planning is an important part of all this.
Even if it's planning afterwards, it just takes a lot longer.
Right.
So if folks, who've been watching today are getting excited, what are your recommendations for getting started with video? Do you have some, favorite tutorials, favorite tools? What should they do to jump right in and start thinking about ways that video can help them with their repurposing?
Yeah, I think we've probably highlighted the importance of planning enough, hopefully by now. So I think starting with the goal in mind, or the end in mind of where you want to be, is definitely a great place to start. I like to kind of think about what you have to work with. Certain businesses will have something, like say you've got a bunch of photos that you've taken that you could repurpose. Let's just put that on the table as something to work with. Or if you're doing thought leadership, do you have a bunch of people inside your company that are subject matter experts that you could interview and make something come out of that? Or if you're doing something that's really visual on an ongoing basis, shooting video at an event, or something that you're doing out in the real world on a regular basis. So I think it's the goal, and then what are the sort of high level things that we have to work with. And then I think just going through the exercise, I've got a 10 question questionnaire basically that I've been using with prospects to go through and start to give shape to what a plan could look like. Where are you trying to go with your business in 6 months? What is your audience? What kind of channels you're on? So just doing a little bit of like high level, it's planning, but question asking about what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to accomplish it, the who, what, when, why, where. So I think that's a great way to go.
I'm going to stop you right there, because Carmen Hill is watching us, and Carmen and I had a recent conversation about, a lot of organizations get really hung up on the word content strategy. It becomes a huge sticking point. Even things like having a content marketing plan can be a problem. But as you just put out there, having some questions that you ask at the start of a project, that feels really non-threatening, right? That feels like something you can get people to do. So if you are in that kind of an organization where you can't get that buy-in, but that you don't want to be creating random content that's completely, divorced from the rest of your business strategies, I love the idea of just, posing it as that you're asking questions. You've got some questions to make sure that you've got context, because anybody who says, no, you don't need any context, they're not a nice person, and you don't want to work with them anyway, because people who don't want to give you context to do better work, they're not going to be happy with what they're going to get either.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I myself have struggled with this terms like strategy and plan. Like, what does that mean? What's the difference between a strategy and a plan? Yeah, it's a good point. And, I think you could say that a plan is never really done, right? Like you make a plan, you move forward, but I think you should have, iteration built into any plan, because
100%.
No battle plan survives the first shot, right? It's like things will change, new information comes along, lessons are learned. So you have to be able to like have an ability to fold those in. I mean, I guess you don't have to, like you could keep keep marching in the same direction and see what happens. But if you
Well,
find out
that's silly.
there's a
We
cliff
like to
there,
learn.
yeah,
We
if
like
there's a
to
cliff
learn and
up ahead,
revise.
yeah. So I've just been taking an iterative approach, and I think that's the way to go. Is you ask the questions, you start to make a plan, and then you start making some assumptions. Well, if all these things are true, what about this option? And I love that word option because it's not necessarily a proposal. I'm not saying we should do that, but it's something we could do. And then take the temperature as an organization. Does this feel right? Is this going to start checking off boxes? What are the alternatives? We're asking more questions. But as we move forward and just have this question asking, hypothesis testing, sort of a scientific approach of like, can we get closer towards an action plan that we all have alignment on? So that's sort of my current methodology, subject to change.
Well, it definitely feels, excuse me, like a very non-threatening way to get started. Because if you come in and you say, I've got all these ideas, how we should be using video and how we should incorporate it into our plan. And I've actually created a video strategy, because people get really excited and they like jump right in with both feet and say, I have a whole strategy for a new channel or a new platform or a new content type, versus saying, hey, I have an idea for something that we could potentially do. Can we try this? Can we learn from it? I think that, kind of an approach is just so much more appealing to so many folks, and so much more likely to be able to take advantage of the, hey, do we have some money just sort of that we got to spend by the end of the quarter?
Yeah.
Those were always my favorite questions I would get from folks when I was still in-house. When somebody would be like, does anybody have like a project, that would cost, and they'll throw out a ballpark number. Like, because we got to spend this money by the end of this quarter or we're going to lose it. I think it's so good to have your list of, here are all those ideas or options. You just keep them, and you keep them like at hand. And so that way, the moment you get that email that says, hey, does anybody have, that, you go into that file, you copy paste it, you hit reply, and you send, here's what we could do with that amount of money. I got to tell you, I have done so many fun test and learn projects by just being the fastest finger to respond and be like, oh yes, I can spend your money.
Yeah, I like it. Fastest finger. Yeah, I think another thing that's been helpful for me is thinking about, what I've been working on, this sort of repurposing model, is thinking of it as like a framework, because it's a way that you can create video for just about any use case of what you're trying to do with your business. And you can kind of scale it up or down. So it's not like I'm advocating that you do this a certain way. It's just a way of doing things that's going to tend to have good outcomes and help you maximize your money, because it's repurposing by design. And so that allows me to kind of like move forward down that sales funnel or down that decision-making process of like, okay, we're going to focus on the framework of how we're going to do it. And the actual way we're going to spit out content is kind of up to you and what you have appetite for, because we could do this big thing and have really great results. It's probably going to go well, but not if you don't have the money or the time or the interest of doing that. Maybe there's something smaller we need to start with to get you comfortable with it, to get some lessons learned, to get buy-in, right? Yeah. And then I can start advocating just for an approach rather than an actual set of deliverables.
Totally. And Carmen, definitely that resonated with her too, because, you'll have that big picture strategy of what you're trying to accomplish with your business, with your marketing, with your content. But, that tactical planning does have to be a little bit more agile and be able to respond. So you can do that, testing and learning, and be tweaking your plan as you go along. So it does still align to that strategy, but it reflects the realities of the things you've tried, because that's the whole point of testing and learning.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've all been through a pandemic where we learned that things can change real big, real fast. And even now we're kind of back to school season. People are getting COVID. So like, as you're making plans, does your plan account for someone being out for a week with COVID? Right? Like, you need to, it's the same point, but the tactical flexibility, or like, what if we're doing things one way and then there's something that happens in politics or in social media, like a platform gets shut down, or who knows?
Platform gets blocked in a specific country that
is or like
market.
The algorithm changes to no longer like the way that you're doing it. So you need that tactical flexibility for sure.
Totally. With all that in mind, do you have some recommendations for blogs or podcasts or resources that folks should check out to, to get better at doing this kind of work?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a couple that come to mind. I will just mention them and then send you this stuff later. So
Perfect.
there was a great podcast I recently watched about the idea of information gain. I don't know if your audience would be familiar with this, but it is basically the idea that the Google algorithm is going to start to favor content that is adding to the collective knowledge of what's out there. The glut of AI is really great of condensing, summarizing, rehashing, but it's not adding. It's not new. So there's a huge opportunity to start using a format like we're doing right now. We're talking about the latest and greatest on a topic. Well, that's valuable content because it's new, it's fresh, it's people are learning, they're going to engage with the new stuff. That's what they need. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. The podcast was with some new people on my network, Tyler Hakes from Yes Optimist and Bernard Huang, I think, with ClearScope. That was a fantastic podcast. I highly recommend that. That was a real eye-opener for me.
I can't wait to listen to it because that's a topic I love.
Yeah.
Because, thought leadership, if it's actually thought leadership, is going to 100% fit that bill because it's going to be a new perspective based on a unique experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there was another course that I took. It's called Content Lab 2.0. And I got to get this guy's name. He's in the UK. And it was a fantastic course. It really was sort of about content, a content framework for ideation and setting up a pipeline. And I'm going to use this myself, or am using this now, to basically come up with a content plan, content strategy ongoing. I know how to make content, but I've never actually gone through the exercise of systematically developing a long-term strategy for creating the content that's going to resonate with my audience. Now, I'm not going to do it with a text-focused approach. I will obviously be repurposing the interviews that I'm doing, but I'm going to be using that. But anyway, that's Content Lab 2.0, and I've got to get this guy's name here. I can send that to you later.
I'll just point out that it is always the case that whether you're a blogger or, a marketer or, an agency owner in whatever field, it's always funny how it takes us a long time before we get to that point where we're like, hey, we actually got to be using this thing that we do so well for everybody else for our own business.
The poorly shod cobbler's kids, right?
That's right.
Yeah, it's always a bitter pill to swallow. But yeah, this is my opportunity now to be doing that for myself. So I'm excited. It's been a fun exercise. So the final thing I would recommend people check out is the editing program Descript. It's pretty mind-blowing for someone like me who's been a video editor in the traditional way, like using Adobe Premiere, timeline-based editing. The way the Descript works is it's really kind of designed, I think, for people who are not video editors. You use the transcription file to edit the text and pull out clips and basically edit that way. And it's got some amazing AI features, like it will take the whole video and you can say, take out all the ums and ahs. And it just one fell swoop just knocks them all out. It's got some other weird features like make my eyes look at the camera, not all over the place.
I hate when people use that one. It
can get a little creepy, but like just to give you a taste of the kind of things that are out there. Or like automatic green screen, just take away my background and make it invisible. So I think for people who are non-editors, it's going to make editing way more accessible, and it's really built for repurposing as well. So I think that's a real strong one. There's all kinds of YouTube videos you can watch about that. So I think that's
Descript. I will definitely, I'm another huge fan of it because I've had clients who will do multiple customer interviews that way. And in the old days, I would in the really old days, I'd have to sit through hours and hours of video footage, writing notes to myself, like looking at the numbers on the screen and, okay, here's where it is, and noting those clips. And, you know, it evolved to, okay, I would get a transcript and I would highlight in the transcript where I would want my video editor to do the rough cut. But now, you know, when I would get all that stuff with the script, I would just go in and I would pull out, here are all the bits I like, and here's the order I'd put them in, and have, you know, that rough cut to hand over instead. And that is just, I mean, that is such a game changer. It saves everyone so much time. And then in the end, it saves the client a bunch of money too.
Yeah, exactly. And we all like that.
Definitely. Resources, no one ever says, I have way too many resources. Can you help me?
Please take some of my resources away.
I'd like to spend more money. Yeah, said no marketer ever.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's appropriate, but am I able to offer my assistance? I mean, that's as a resource.
Where can folks find you?
Well, this is sort of my big takeaway. I'm hoping is that I know that video is hard. It's complicated. Just how to do it, what to do, when, all that stuff. I mean, there's so many options. So I've been just offering myself as a resource just to talk. I'm not necessarily trying to like sell you anything. If you want some help, sure, we can talk. But like, if you just got some questions, I want to be part of this community. One of the video natives in content marketing has been sort of a text heavy focus, and this big opportunity that we have right now. I would hate to see people not be able to take advantage, because I don't know how long this is going to last. When people start figuring this out, that they can take advantage of video and make it effective pretty easy compared to the way it used to be, you know? Yeah. So that's, that's my spiel. I'm here. So just reach out.
And where can folks find you online? What are the best places?
Yeah. So my company is digitalcompass.com. As I mentioned, we're sort of going through a rebirth of like how to do marketing. So I'm working on like the landing pages and getting an email subscription option out there. So digitalcompass.com, or you can look me up on LinkedIn, Dane Frederiksen. And should be pretty easy to find. There's not too many of me out there.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully giving folks some confidence that they really can and should be getting out there and using video as a way to both repurpose content and as a starting point for being able to repurpose for all their different channels. So thank you so much for joining us, and see everybody next week.
Thanks, Erika.